while we're talking about Katie Milkman, who does a lot of behavioural science work, she has a really funny study that actually would have been quite a fun one to be part of, where they got two groups of women to exercise, and they told one group of women that they're going to do walking, but they're walking for fun. It's for recreation, it's for fun. And they told another group of women that they were walking for exercise. And so it's for fitness, it's for exercise. And afterwards, they brought them back and they got them to do a series of questionnaires. And those that were walking for exercise, next to the questionnaires, they had this big bowl of M&Ms. And they compared those that walk for exercise versus those that walk for fun and how much M&Ms they ate. And those that walk for fun ate significantly less M&Ms than those that walk for exercise. And, you know, they hypothesized that that was due down to the restriction or the kind of deprivation that those that had to walk for fun, you know, or walk for exercise because of the regime, you know, for fitness, that they felt more deprived and more like they were missing out. So they overcompensated and ate more, whereas those that walk for fun, you know, ate less because they didn't feel that deprivation. They felt like they chose to do it and they enjoyed it.
Doctor's Kitchen. Recipes, health, lifestyle. The last time we spoke, I was cooking for you. That's probably the last time we saw each other in person. I think I remember I cooked you a Middle Eastern style dish, like a tabbouleh almost, or a play on that.
Yeah.
So it had like parsley in it and like a whole bunch of other vegetables.
Yeah, because I remember, because I really don't like parsley. Yeah. That's the only thing I don't like. And you outed me for my parsley hatred. And you were like, "Well, just have a little bit. You're so tied to your herbs. You're like, we'll just have a little bit." And I'm like, "Really? Like, maybe we could go coriander?" And you're like, "Just a little. It just really needs the parsley."
Yeah, totally. But I'm glad I managed to convince you to have some of that at least. But yeah, so for those of the listeners who haven't come across that episode or haven't come across your work, I wonder if you could do like a little refresher into you and your background and why you're so passionate about this subject. I'm really passionate about it, and I you know, love talking to you every time. And you actually before you do that, I just want to remind listeners that you were the person that introduced me first to James Clear, Atomic Habits. I remember when you gave me the book, you were like, "You need to read this book." I was like, "Oh, I've never even heard of it before." Now it's like, you know, some crazy bestseller. So thank you for that. I think it's been, you know, pivotal to the way I think as well.
He's incredible. He is incredible. Like his work, I just think he's just the most beautiful. He's the most beautiful way of translating research and science into accessible things that we want to do. And like, I think that matters to me a lot. And that he, like, you know, people are like, "Oh, he doesn't have he's a journalist or whatever." But I'm like, that doesn't matter. In fact, that makes him better in a way, because he's just taking concepts and making it real world for us. And
absolutely,
for so long we haven't had that. So in terms of like behavioral science. So yeah, big fan.
Yeah, definitely. Well, enough about James. Let's talk about you.
Oh God. Okay. What do you want to know?
so tell us a bit about your how you started your academic career and what led you down this path of academia and what you do in practice.
So how did I start? God, that makes me think back to my careers guidance teacher. He was like, "Oh, there's this course called like sports science and health, like an undergraduate degree." And I was like, "That sounds too fun. That can't be a real degree." But yeah, I went on to do that initially, which I loved. And actually, my thesis in that was looking at men's mental health and managing how men manage moderate to severe depression, and looking at exercise as an intervention for that. And we looked at exercise alone in the gym and exercise in groups. And we found that exercise in groups with CBT therapy kind of sprinkled in was more effective because of the bonding and the different factors that kind of went behind that. And that just basically kind of started the spark that got me really interested in how actually psychology can really help transform people's lives. And it was when I was in actually doing my undergrad, I was working in a metabolic syndrome clinic, and we had amazing personal trainers. We had incredible nutritionists, and every person that was in the clinic had these unreal plans. Like, they were so perfect. You know, I was trying to like photocopy them for myself. And it was funny because everyone had all these tools. They had all of the things that they needed, and yet they were still struggling. They were struggling to put things in place. And it was really intriguing for me. So I sat down with every single person in the clinic, all 60 of them, and just had a chat and was like, what's stopping you? What's getting in the way? You know, why is it that you can't make these habits stick? And that really got me really fired up about behavioural science and behaviour change. And from then, I went to Loughborough University and studied more into health psychology and behavioural science. And then I went on to Birmingham to do a PhD in the psychology of weight loss. So how to lose weight without dieting. So again, like, you know, how do we use skills, routines, goals, how do we resist temptation, all research into self-regulation, self-determination theory, you know, all these pieces around, well, what fuels motivation, and how do we actually, because I'm absolutely obsessed with what throws people off track and what keeps people on track. And we did these studies where we looked at people that had been sustaining healthy habits for years, like 5, 10, 15 years, versus those that had done it for a period of time, like a good few years, and then fallen off track. And we were looking at, well, what was the difference? And you know, why did they, you know, go off track when so many other people, you know, well, some of them, why did they sustain habits, and then why did others go off track? And that was fascinating. And then after academia, I'd set up this group. So we had a group of people that were doing, like, we were training in psychological skills, and we had another group that were exercise and diet alone. And so normal kind of, you know, weight management group versus one that just looked at psychological skills. And I just loved being with people. Like, I just loved being kind of there, chatting with people, really understanding their barriers, like trying to really like get an idea of the context in which they live. And it was in you know, quite a poor area of Birmingham, and there were people that had a lot of kind of social struggles, and you know, it was just so eye-opening for someone who's come from quite a privileged background to actually really kind of get into the mindsets of people and really understand, you know, that it's not as simple as the advice or the information that we give people. And it was kind of when my studies got taken up by the media then in the US and stuff, and people started messaging me saying like, how do I lose weight without dieting, or how do I sustain my habits? And I was like, yeah, oh God, people are into this. Like, because I was obviously into it, but you know, I was like, people are into it like me. And so I was working kind of for a few different charities, like working as a consultant, so helping them set up behavior change programs, you know, to either self-manage on conditions or different bits and pieces. But I was like, I might give this a go. People seem to be into it. And so then I kind of launched into consultancy. So I started working with a couple of different, you know, companies that have behavior change programs. And then more recently, now we're in the digital age, it's kind of merged into digital health behavior change as well. And I now do a lot of talking as well, a lot of keynote speaking, because you can't shut me up about it. So you might as well put me on a stage with a mic and I'll keep talking about it. But I feel so incredibly lucky to be in a field that lights me up so much. And I know you know, you're similar to myself. You're so passionate about your field, and yeah, I almost feel in a way evangelical about it, because I feel like I know things like that maybe others don't know, and I think it's really unfair of me not to be able to share that with people in a way, and I feel very compelled to do so. And I like we were just talking about there, you know, I want there to be a platform where we can translate the research into, you know, things people can do day to day, and that's really important to me. Because I know people don't read journal papers day in, day out, and I think it's very important to me to be able to actually you know, be able to break down what they say and what the latest findings are, that makes it accessible for people that they can then apply to their lives straight away.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so much there that you just spoke about that really does resonate with my own personal experience, both as a clinician, but also as a patient as well. I mean, we're all patients in some way or form. One of the things that I remember vividly is having that realization that just me telling people the types of foods that they should be focusing their diet around, or the benefits and the evidence base around these particular suite of foods, eating consistently over time, was nowhere near enough. We're not even scratching the surface when it comes to actually enacting that, or motivating that person to enact that change for the long term. And the skill set that is required, whether it be culinary creativity, whether it be a plan, or the motivation to stick to said plan, that is so important. I don't think I came to that realization until probably halfway through my medical career, by which time I'd seen thousands of patients. So I really agree with what you're saying. It's critical to sort of have this piece of the puzzle when it comes to lifestyle changes, whether they be individual goals, whether it be work-based goals, whether it be health goals, whether it be psychological, emotional goals, all these different things, they definitely need to be seen through the lens of behavior change.
And actually, Rupi, what you talking there makes me think, there's an analogy I use, which is, how many of us don't know we need to eat more vegetables? How many of us don't know that we need to sleep more? How many of us don't know that we need to drink more water or manage our stress better? But these are what I call the ingredients of change. And so we can all know the ingredients in the recipe for health. But the problem is, where we get stuck is turning our intentions into actions. And that's where behavioral science comes in. And I say it's the method in the recipe for health. So it's how to take these vital ingredients and actually intertwine them and put them into the context of your life. And your life is different than, the next person's life. But it's very important that we think about context, but we also think about skills. And I have a cheesy phrase, it's about skill power, not willpower, that makes habits last. But ultimately, and you mentioned it there, it's about enabling people and empowering them with skills to take the ingredients for change and actually, understand what method works for them. So skills like goal setting, skills like picking themselves back up after failure, skills like planning, like implementation, skills like, you teach in the app, like how to cook spring greens in 5 minutes, or, how to learn takeaway alternatives, or, how to flavor a meal. That's a skill in itself. But the thing is, we push information, and information doesn't always translate into implementation. And what we need to do is actually empower people with not just the knowledge, but the skills and the confidence to actually make lasting change. And so it's funny because I was watching the Great British Bake Off a while ago, and there's this round in it called the technical challenge. And in the technical challenge, they give you kind of a few of the ingredients or some of the ingredients, but basically no methodology. And it's the part where it really kind of, I was going to say a terrible baking joke there. Bakers really have to prove themselves.
I'm such a sucker for a cheesy joke.
I love it. Okay, don't encourage me. But it's so interesting because those that have, I think it's a really good analogy actually for habit change when you think about it, because those that have practiced, trialed, failed, iterated before know, say they're making a jam donut, they know when to put the ingredients in what order, what's going to make it go flat, what's not going to work. So they've learned through a series of failures what they need to get to that outcome. Whereas those that kind of rush to the outcome or rush to the end to get that perfect jam donut, those are the ones that are unsuccessful. Those are the ones that have that flat, soggy looking jam donut that no one would even want to touch with a barge pole. But I think the thing here is, that's exactly kind of how often we approach health and health behaviors. We want to rush towards the end, just taking the ingredients but not really understanding the methodology and just kind of throwing everything in the kitchen sink at it, rather than actually learning and building our skills through a series of failures, through a series of iterations to get to the ideal, over time, to get that jam donut that we like and that's tasty. Now everyone's going to be craving jam donuts.
I know, yeah, even me, like a warm jam donut. And actually, as you were talking there, I see that in myself, and they're sort of they're almost like invisible skills when you're talking about stuff through the perspective of someone who cooks every single day. So, as an example, if I was given a set of ingredients, some cumin, some fennel seeds, some oil, onions, some beans, some meat, whatever it might be, I know the separate set of skills that combine to create a complete meal. So, for example, I know that the onions are going to have to be cooked for a minimum of 3 to 4 minutes. If you want them more brown and you want them caramelized, then that will be more like 15, 20 minutes. And also to achieve that texture or to achieve that flavor, the cooking temperature needs to be medium to low. If you put it on medium to high, then they're going to cook too fast. And then tempering the spices will take a couple of minutes. So I know if I'm going to use spices in the onions, then those spices need to come at the end or for the last 1 to 2 minutes rather than the start, because otherwise you'll burn your spices. And so it's the collection of all these different bits of knowledge that I apply to a recipe creation methodology that, otherwise, if you're just following the recipe, you don't learn those individual sweet skills, and you're just following along blindly, and you'll never learn the skill set to create your own recipes, which is ultimately what we're trying to create, a behavior change that enables you to look at a set of ingredients and know that's healthy, I know how to cook that, and this is how I'm going to create a meal tonight from these random set of ingredients.
Yeah, exactly that. And it's almost like, showing people the steps that, in the way you break it down. And I've been playing around with your app. I've been looking at to be doing the trial. But the way you break it down, even the images, and it's like, this is what it looks like. This is what it looks like. So you can actually create that. It makes it less intimidating. It makes it more likely that you want to engage with something like that over time. But like you say, it's almost like when you're too close to it, you can't really tell. But they're all little micro skills that you can develop over time. And the beautiful thing about those things is once you kind of get it once, then that's always available to you. That knowledge will always be there. Like once you try your, spring greens in 5 minutes, because I was always like, what do I do with spring greens? I have no idea. And I was always a bit intimidated by them because I was like, there's no way I can make them taste good. Once you try it once, then you've got that in the bag. That's a tool in your toolkit, and you can go on to learning new or bigger things. I think it's a beautiful way to actually teach people lifelong skills that will stay with them.
Absolutely, yeah. I want to dive into a bit about the skill power versus willpower, but I know people would have picked up on something that you said earlier, which is this concept around losing weight without dieting. I wonder if we could talk about that, because I think when most people think about diet, they think about 30-day challenge or a 90-day sort of set of ingredients that you follow alongside an exercise regime. And we know the evidence is there that you will lose weight. But then also when you track said person or people over time, you'll see them actually increase beyond the weight point that they started with, and sometimes go even further up. And you see this sort of yo-yo pattern where actually the trend is going up. And we've talked about it on the podcast before with a number of obesity researchers talking about weight set point. But I believe it also has its grounding in behavior change. And just like we were saying, if you don't have that skill set to understand how to maintain a healthy diet, then you're always going to be, at the mercy of the next diet. So I wonder if we could talk a bit about this concept of losing weight without dieting, and how the other sort of inputs factor into one maintaining their weight and losing it.
Yeah, and I'd love to tell you that it's one thing.
Yeah, of course.
But it never is. It's always a culmination. And again, I suppose it's like the methodology. You've got to find, what works for you. Some people, like you said, with the onion recipe, some people like really crispy ones. Some people like them slightly undercooked. You've got to find the flavor of behavior change that works for you. But I think one of the issues I see with, I suppose, non-behavioral science-led weight loss programs are that there's an overt focus on the scales. There's an overt focus on achieving a particular number. And as we know from the science, weight loss is never really that linear. And there are plateaus and there are setbacks and everything else. And so inevitably, if you're overly focused on that outcome alone, you're going to feel like a failure sooner or later, because there's no way you can ever sustain, long term, keep losing weight. And I don't know, one thing that I think is really important is that actually people look at non-weight loss or non-scale related wins. So the fact that they, learn to make an omelette from scratch, or the fact that they, have started going for a walk in the park, or the skills that they have developed, because those are the things that are going to last with you. It's not the weight on the scales becomes arbitrary after a while, or it becomes another stick to beat yourself with after a while. But when we overly focus on those outcomes, we're quite extrinsically motivated. And I call extrinsic motivation slippy motivation. It's the type of motivation that you need, like, your friends to say well done, or for people to comment on your weight loss, or for even your doctor to tell you you're doing well. It's not really, it's external motivation. It's almost that feeling you get when you've been scrolling on Instagram for too long, that kind of icky feeling, like a disconnected feeling. Whereas intrinsic motivation, on the other hand, is what I call sticky motivation. And so this is things like, things that you focus on in the process of weight loss. So it's things about, like, how exercising more makes you feel more energized, how you've taken back up golf after not playing for years, or tennis, or whatever it is, how, having a hot water with lemon first thing in the morning makes you feel refreshed and revived. It's actually the joys that being healthy brings back. And I think actually when we focus on what we can add in rather than what we take away when it comes to weight loss, it makes it just actually more a pleasant process as well. Because even, Rupi used a word there, regime, and it doesn't have to be a regime. It can be a routine. But the problem is that we get so focused on that number. And if that number doesn't tell us what we want, does that motivate us to keep going? Often it doesn't. Often people will kind of step back. There's really interesting scales that's been developed by a behavioral designer, and it's actually color coded rather than actually having numbers on it. So it just tells people, where they are in a range, and it's to help people kind of, be able to normalize fluctuations, because fluctuations are a normal part of the weight loss process. But it's also, to help them stay engaged with their progress, but in a way that they're not fixated on a particular number, a way that they don't hang their self-esteem on a particular number. Because you could have been, eating really healthy foods, really enjoying it, exercising, getting really into everything. But if the scales didn't tell you the right number, you're like, well, I'm just going to pack it all in, and I'll start again, in January or on Monday or whenever, the deadline you create for yourself is. And so I think it's just really, really important that we kind of start moving away from overly outcomes focused and start working on the process and actually finding. And one thing I always tell people is, when they start off in a weight loss journey, is start with a list of what brings you joy. Where can you find joy in your healthy habits? Because, if you can find joy, then the rest becomes easy. And I think that's a really, really important thing. And both it's evidence-based as well, because we know that those that enjoy the habits are the most, basically the habits you enjoy are the habits that you stick to. And that's why at the start as well, we need this experimentation phase. I never like to call it failure, because failure is such a valuable part of the process. So we need to experiment, just like, you do with a recipe, to find, okay, does the parsley go in this frittata, or does it taste better with coriander? All of those things, to find that what works for you. And so we actually need a series of failures at the start to get to ultimately, that method in the recipe for our health that works for us.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that sort of focus on joy and those different elements. It's something that I've been very conscious to implement in every aspect actually of the doctor's kitchen, you know, whether it's um, the books, the stuff we talk about on the website, the way in which we conduct our articles, and like the humor that we try to input into there, you know, joy and the flavorful and the deliciousness of food and the celebration aspect of food is something that I kind of want to bring to the forefront. And actually, you're probably privy to some of this research that came out of, I believe, Stanford and Alicia Crumb's group about how if you describe food with the flavorful aspects of it first, that makes it a lot more desirable for someone not prioritizing the healthy. It might still be a healthy recipe, but if you prioritize the flavorful aspects of it, people are more likely to opt into it and stick to that way of eating, which is something that I've always kind of drilled into the way I do recipes now, because I know I shouldn't be leading with the fact that, okay, it's got all these anti-inflammatory chemicals in, and, you know, this has been shown to be beneficial for X, Y, Z. It's actually, no, this is going to taste amazing, and this is the reason why, and it just so happens to be really healthy for you as well.
Yeah, exactly. And ultimately, isn't that what life's about? It's about finding little joys, you know,
Yeah.
that actually keep us going day to day. And I think health has got a bad rap, you know, and I think it's because we're really hard on ourselves about it. And we all become overnight perfectionists, you know, as soon as we try and change our habits. And actually, you know, I like to say habits are for life, not just for January. You know, it's not like, you know, if you think about a habit we all have, it's just, you know, brushing our teeth in the morning. It's not like we do all our dental hygiene in January and then we're done for the rest of the year. If you're not following, no longer following it, you know, it's no longer a habit. But if you're going to adopt these, why not make them, you know, habits that you enjoy, and that bring you joy. And even the habit of actually, it's a succession of habits, but learning to cook different dishes and everything else, like even just the process of that can be quite a mindful, meditative, enjoyable ritual. But if you're coming at it from the constraint of, I have to do this, I should do this. And interesting, in the research, they've shown that like have to goals versus want to goals. So if you feel like you have to do something and you use that particular language, you're much less likely to carry on. But if you feel like you choose to do something and you know, you're doing it for the joy and the delight, it brings you, you know, it's much more likely to sustain that habit.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because we all do it. Like, you know, think about when you join a gym for the first time. You know, you scan the gym floor and you're like, right, what's the hardest you know, piece of equipment that I could use? What's that you know, that bike that's like the assault bike, you know,
The
you're
assault
like,
bike
okay,
is,
right, I'm
yeah,
gonna
it's
hone in on,
very hard.
yeah, you're like, that looks like the hardest. Or, you know, the step master or whatever. You know, we all, there's a really interesting study where they looked at, you know, the fact that people tend to go for what they feel like they could benefit from the most rather than actually what they enjoy the most. But those that go for what they enjoy the most tend to be the ones that stick to it. And actually, while we're talking about Katie Milkman, who does a lot of behavioral science work, she has a really funny study that actually would have been quite a fun one to be part of, where they got two groups of women to exercise. And they told one group of women that they're going to do walking, but they're walking for fun. It's for recreation, it's for fun. And they told another group of women that they were walking for exercise. And so it's for fitness, it's for exercise. And afterwards, they brought them back and they got them to do a series of questionnaires. And those that were walking for exercise, next to the questionnaires, they had this big bowl of M&Ms. And they compared those that walk for exercise versus those that walk for fun and how much M&Ms they ate. And those that walk for fun ate significantly less M&Ms than those that walk for exercise. And, you know, they hypothesized that that was due down to the restriction with the kind of deprivation that those that had to walk for fun, you know, or walk for exercise because of the regime, you know, for fitness, that they felt more deprived and more like they were missing out. So they overcompensated and ate more, whereas those that walk for fun, you know, ate less because they didn't feel that deprivation. They felt like they chose to do it and they enjoyed it.
That's amazing. You know what? I come across so many of these like behavioral psychology studies, and I just think it must be so fun to be a researcher because
Yeah.
there are like, you know, these little hacks of like, oh, you think we're we're testing like, you know, how many miles you've walked, or like, you know, your calorie expenditure, but actually the crux
Yeah.
of the experiment is the number of M&Ms that we just so happen to put right next to your form. Like there's so many little tweaks like that I've come across in behavioral
Yeah.
psychology research. It's brilliant. They've got such like incredibly creative minds.
Yeah, it's hard though. It's very hard to get ethics for some of those
Yeah,
things because there's an
yeah.
element of deception, which can often be quite tricky. So you've got to be a real psychologist in terms of how you word the way around that. But yeah, no, I absolutely I get such a buzz from some of these studies, and they're really really interesting.
Yeah, I remember actually there was a study, I can't remember the details of it now, but I think the cohorts were being shown some sort of like sad, not images, but like sad videos or something. And they had some
Mm,
donuts at the
yeah.
back of the room, and some of them were stale. And I think like, you know, the number of stale donuts consumed correlated with, you know, the emotions that these guys must have been feeling when they were watching this video. And that was actually what they were being tested, but they were deceived into deceive is a big word, but like they were being told that the research study was about something else. So, you know, it's those little things that I just find fascinating.
Yeah, there's some I know it's kind of actually been a bit controversial at the moment, but there's a Brian Wansink, he does a lot of studies in he gave people different sized bits of popcorn when they went to the cinema,
Right.
and even if it was stale popcorn, if you're eating out of a large popcorn box, people tend to still eat more no matter if the popcorn is stale. They didn't even seem to
Ah,
notice in a way
wow.
in the cinema, but it's to show that, like, you know, when we have those larger portion sizes, it's almost like an optical illusion in a way, that we overcompensate and eat significantly more than if we had a smaller size amount. And it's not for enjoyment.
Mm,
That's just a habitual thing in terms of actually when we're given larger portions. And so the argument there was that we need to, you know, have more kind of bite-sized options for people and smaller portions, because we actually can't mentally do the calculations when we get a larger portion size. And it's easier, you know, out of sight out of mind is it's much easier than actually having to rely, like I say, on your willpower, which is, you know, an unreliable resource, because as soon as you get in an argument or get cranky or don't have enough sleep or
yeah.
get a bit hungry, your willpower is out the window and it's not going to serve you. So yeah, those studies have been quite interesting.
Yeah, super fascinating. So you talked a bit about like the academia side and how the arc of your career has sort of progressed, and now it's into the digital side. Well, when did you start getting involved in digital apps and digital programs? When was your sort of like first experience with that?
Yeah, good question. Well, actually, in my as part of my PhD, I did design an app.
Oh, right.
Well, I say I worked with a computer specialist, and he designed the app, and I just kind of annoyed him in the background about how he was writing the code. Um, but it was that was my kind of first dabble into it, and what we did was we designed an app to track when people were most tempted and why, and we gave it to people over time, and we you know, sent them notifications throughout the day, and we also got them to fill it in when they did give in to temptation. And I thought that was a really interesting way of monitoring people's engagement, you know, basically tracking people. Whereas before, you know, we had diaries and people had to write things down, and it was very arduous, and you had to remember to bring this big thing with you and everything
Mm,
else. Whereas like something we all have everywhere we go often is our phone. And
mm.
I think that's what's really interesting about, you know, a huge part of behavioral science is context. And now we have this whole new context or environment in our lives, which is our phone,
Yeah.
and it's always with us, and for better and for good, you know. And I think for good in ways that, you know, it's often hard to get, hard to reach patients to self-present for certain interventions. I certainly know that we ran a nationwide behavioural change intervention for people with long-term conditions, and one of the biggest barriers was accessibility, finding a location that was on a good bus route, that had enough disabled parking, that was the right time of day, that people didn't have to take off work. A lot of people had children, they had to be minded if they went to a particular location, they had to get people to drive them. There were so many barriers, whereas I think what's really exciting and interesting about digital health is it breaks down and removes a lot of those barriers, even the barriers of self-presentation at an intervention. Showing up and saying, I'm someone that wants to lose weight, manage my condition better, get fitter, or whatever else. Actually, if you've got that in your phone, you're less obviously self-conscious or self-concerned about it at the same time as well. So I kind of started working for companies that actually had more of a digital focus in terms of health and well-being, and for better and for worse, because a lot of people kind of pay lip service to behavioral change. They think if they're trying to change a behavior, then they're using behavioral science, but it isn't always the way. And often people will say, well, it's a weight loss app, and I'll say, well, what are the behaviors that you're trying to change? And they're like, oh, we're trying to help people lose weight. And I'm like, yeah, but what are the behaviors within that? And often people don't understand, well, what are the behaviors that we need to see? How do we monitor those behaviors? How do we understand those behaviors to get the particular outcomes then that we want? And that's where I see a lot of apps fall down. And also, I could go on, but there's so many other things. But even, with digital programs, people don't realize that you have to make the digital program or app a habit in itself before you even start getting, users to even develop habits within that product. So you have to make, the app or the digital program sticky. So like you said, making it fun, making it colorful, the tone of voice that you use, but also, tapping into people's intrinsic motivation in a supportive way and helping people feel heard and understood. And, there's so many elements. I'll stop there. But, I think one of the things, I think it's a really exciting field. I definitely think it's in its infancy. We don't have enough long-term evidence on the effectiveness. But it's exciting. It's a new way of actually, getting into people's lives in a way that meets them where they're at, causes them less hassle. And I think one thing in behavioral science is there's two big things, actually. There's friction and fuel. And so friction is, anything that kind of gets in the way. And, clever digital programs are good at reducing friction. So if we think about a classic one that we might all know is how Netflix does this by preloading the next episode.
Yeah.
So it reduces the friction to us binge watching. We don't have to go out and go in and, all of that. Or even, actually doing digital forms rather than having to go into, our GP's office or the pharmacy to fill them out. Can be, can lighten the load for people, or even, not having to take a half day off work to go see the doctor face to face. Now that there's, options for digital consults, that can make it more accessible for people, maybe that have children or, a job that they can't take time off from. So we want to always enhance or reduce friction for the behaviors that we want to engage with, and almost enhance friction then for the behaviors that we don't want to engage with. So make them harder to do, essentially. Like, I've got a thing on my phone that doesn't let me on anything except for work-related stuff, from 9 a.m. onwards. And that just, it's just a small barrier. Now I can take it off if I want to or whatever else, but it's just one small barrier that stops me engaging in something that I know is not helpful for me.
What app is that you use that blocks the? I might need
it's
to
just
use
actually it's on Samsung.
Oh, is it? Okay.
I've got all sorts, and I was trying to voice record this, so we had the backup recording, and I had to give myself permission to use this app while I'm in this function, and it knocks me right off. So I have it on from 9 until 6, and then it comes back on at 9 p.m. again, so that I don't engage my phone at night. But it literally will knock you off the app. So you'd be halfway through a text message to your mom and you'll be gone. But it's useful because it basically, you know, I'd have to use willpower to stay off my phone. And phones are very sticky products. They're very addictive, you know, for better and for worse. And so it actually just is another way, another nudge to actually say, come on, Heather, like, you know, enough's enough. And now it's time to get back into the real world. So it can be quite helpful. I mentioned there friction, but there's also fuel as well. And I think fuel is really important to think about. And, you know, people often talk about motivation and, you know, we need lots of motivation. It's not really about how much motivation we need. It's more about what fuels that motivation. And I know we talked about intrinsic motivation there, you know, the sticky motivation, the motivation that's like internal. It's from you, you know, it's that being healthier, what it gives you back in life, you know, for my self-management patients, it was, you know, that they were able to walk to get the bus, like walk to the bus stop. So then, you know, the whole world was open to them then. Or they were able to, you know, play football in the garden with their grandson, or, you know, it was instead of exercise feeling like a fearful and a really kind of regimented thing, it was about, you know, when we started to reframe it for them about what it gave them back. That really, really helped fuel their motivation in a positive way. And there's ways we can do that within digital products as well. And a lot of that is around, I'm quite enamored with self-determination theory, which is theory of motivation, which I'm sure you've heard about. But there's over 40 years of research showing that, you know, it's a really effective way in which to support long-term engagement. And what I mean by that is self-determination theory is just a theory of motivation, about essentially the fuel of motivation. And it says that each person is fueled by kind of 3 basic needs. And those needs are autonomy, competence, and relatedness. So autonomy being that we want to have ownership, we want to have freedom in our choices. Competence being that we want to feel confident in our competence or our ability to do things. We want to feel like we're progressing and we're getting better. And then there's relatedness, that we want to feel part of something that's bigger than ourselves, part of, you know, a community. And when we enhance these needs, or when these needs are fully met, then individuals can thrive. And they've shown that time and time again. And they've shown in terms of lifestyle habits, if we can enhance these needs, then are much more likely to sustain those lifestyle habits over time. And someone is much more likely to be intrinsically motivated, much more likely to enjoy the behaviors that they're carrying out. But there's multiple ways we can do that within digital products as well, which is quite exciting.
Yeah,
actually, speak to if it's of interest.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, as you were talking about a number of different things I want to touch on, self-determination theory, you think about it and you can see some of the best digital products out there really leaning into that, into those different facets. So autonomy, you know, you're on your own journey through the app, you know, you choose which path you want to go down. The competency and actually reinforcing that. So, you know, when you get badges and you get sort of like reaffirmed that you are progressing and you're actually collecting skills. And then the relatedness, you know, the little feature about how many people are also using the app, or how many people, you know, Wordle, for example, very, very, very interesting feature that this 5-letter word game that went viral during lockdown, is the number of people who took X number of tries to get the word today. And you might be, you know, above average or below average, or, you know, part of the mode that the number of people that took to get to that particular letter. You know, that kind of reaffirms like, oh, I'm not just playing this game in isolation. I'm actually part of a community of wordlers, or whatever they call themselves. And then the other elements that I really enjoyed you talking about were the friction and fuel. So you can see some of the apps, particularly in the social media space, really pushing both of these in ways like reducing friction. Straight away you're in the search page whenever you open up a social media page. Fuel, likes, really good fuel. It just taps into that dopamine fueled pathway. The follow account, the commenting, all that kind of stuff. These are all like mini peps of fuel. If you think about like Mario, he's collecting those like flower powers, and he just like goes like double speed, all that kind of stuff. You can really tell how certain digital apps are using fuelers. And there's ways in which we can learn from that as well. I think social media obviously has got a bad rep, but if you learn and you actually like dive into what kind of triggers they're using, you can also use that for good as well, to enhance positive behaviors. And the whole element of the digital environment, is clearly accelerated by COVID. No longer was it an opt-in to use telemedicine. You had to use telemedicine, or you just don't see your general practitioner, or you don't see your consultant. I think it's really sort of accelerated what is likely to have been inevitable anyway, which I think is a good thing. And there are even some examples pre-pandemic of countries with poor healthcare infrastructures that have sort of leapfrogged using telemedicine. So there's an example in Rwanda where a telemedicine company essentially allowed an increased distribution of doctors per capita by basically leaning into digital phones, because everyone all of a sudden had mobile devices, smartphones, and they can now see their GPs. Whereas before, that telemedicine era, we would have had to pop up multiple healthcare centers, which obviously has distribution costs. It has, everything that's an issue when it comes to creating healthcare centers in deprived areas. So, and that's another reason why I decided to go into the Doctor's Kitchen app world, because I really wanted to enter into that digital sphere that I think is going to be so important, because no longer is it a case of us having to compete with junk food stores in the high street. It's also competing with junk food stores that you can order food from at the touch of a button on your delivery app. So, moving into this space was sort of like a natural direction, because it's just the way people are going to be going.
And I think that's really interesting. Even what you mentioned there about the apps, it's about, they call it in behavioral science, choice architecture. So how do we, change the environment? And even, our phones in themselves are a micro environment. We can put out our trainers last thing at night, and we can have, our gym kit out and everything, or the book that we want to read in an obvious position. But we can also do the same with our phones. Like we were talking about, I have different modes set up that switch automatically, so I'm not on certain apps. But it's also about, I often encourage people to do a bit of an audit of their phone environment. When you open your home page, what are the first apps you see? What are the first notifications you see? Are they aligned with what your goals are right now in life? So, for example, if you're trying to meditate more, are your notifications around meditation? Are you getting quotes about how to stay calm? Are you getting alerts or calendar invites for different times of day when you can actually take a breath? Or are the things that are alerting you things that actually are taking you away from the things that matter most to you, like staying in a positive headspace and everything else? So I would say to everyone listening, take a look at your phone right now. What are the notifications you're receiving? What is on your home page? Because, it's proximity determines the choices to which we engage with. There's interesting studies that show, the further away they move a bowl of M&Ms, the less likely we are to eat more of them. But the closer they are, the more likely we are. And like you say, if you're getting all these delivery app messages around foods that are unhealthy, and you're trying to eat a healthier diet, then it's time that you spend just 5 minutes going in and working out how to take those notifications off and moving what's most important to you to your home screen. And like you say, now Doctor's Kitchen is offering us another option in that environment. And actually, one thing that I really like about the app, is that you talk about some of these environmental barriers in it. You know, you break them down in terms of like, this is freezer friendly, this recipe only takes X amount of minutes. You know, these are the things, like, so I have an injury at the moment, and so I need to know that I can make, I find it quite hard to stand, so I need to know I can make something in less than 15 minutes. I need to know that I can make it for one, and I know that it's got a really cool thing that you can make it for one to as many people as you want, all at once. But like, you know, these are all little environmental friction things that actually, when you remove them, it adds positive fuel. But I think what you said is, you know, coming to the digital space and being in the digital space and being a support there in people's pockets is really, really important now, because that's the exposure that we have day in, day out. That's what we're consuming. And if we think about it, if you are what you eat, you know, be careful of your media diet, because, you know, that is what we're consuming now way more than anything else. And so let's let that be something that actually supports rather than thwarts our goals.
Yeah, I'm really glad you picked up on some of those features, because prior to launching the app in January of this year, 2022, we had done like extensive research with our community members via the newsletter. We brought people into the studio. We did questionnaires. This is actually pre-pandemic. It's been going on for a little while now, and one of the questionnaires that we sent out was a long questionnaire. It was about a 30-question questionnaire survey, and we had 4,000 responses. And we asked them specifically about their particular health barriers. So what barriers to healthy eating they isolated. And obviously I went through every single one. We had some choices, but we had the other where people could go into their personal reasons. And a lot of people struggle because of fatigue, because of a particular chronic condition, because of injuries sometimes, you know, to actually cook a meal that's longer than 20, 30 minutes. And so one of the things that I wanted to make sure was that we had meals that were no or low cook, so actually required minimal cooking time, which I think is also very important in the context of the cost of living crisis, but also no chop, because a lot of people actually said they didn't have the culinary skills. And so I wanted to create like a whole category of recipes where it's literally like, okay, paste goes in, these ingredients I can just tear with my hands, that goes in, and then like, you know, bag of spinach washed, that goes in. So literally like no sort of need for a chef's knife, because there is definitely a need for that. And I think that's a really good entry point for people who ultimately might want to, you know, learn the skills and the basics of chopping and all the rest of it, but also, you know, we're starting out there sort of that.
Or if
that
you've got
level.
kids around and you don't want to be wielding a knife, you know.
100%, right?
And even when you said that to me, it made me smile, because actually, like, yeah, I get really bad back pain. So often it's often triggered by chopping. So actually having the no chop option like that, you don't even realize, you know, it's helping so many people in different ways.
Yeah, totally. And as you were talking about choice architecture on my personal phone, so I have my my email and my diary, two apps that I use religiously. That my diary basically just runs my life, my Google Calendar. Those are on the home pages, along with a couple other things like my podcast app, and my Audible subscription, because I know that these are things that like I allow myself to sort of indulge in whenever I'm commuting and all the rest of it. And the social media apps are literally on like the third or fourth page. So even though it's a little, you know, it's just a few flicks of your finger, but it's that little friction that, you know, just reminds me, oh, I'm going to, you know, potentially go into a social media like time zone here where I'm just going to be sucked into the app. So it's that little sort of choice architecture that I've instigated on my phone that I think is really helpful for me, and it might be very helpful for other people too.
Yeah, and I think that's so important. Any of those kind of frictions you can add in. It's kind of almost like, you know, when you're too hungry and you just open the cupboard and you're like looking around for something to have, versus when you've got a healthy snack prepared and it's ready to go. You know, it's just a way of keeping you on track with what's important to you. And I think that's really, really important. And I think it's important that we do step back, and even, you know, within our social media, when we think about, you know, what are the goals that I wish to create this year? So say you're starting a new business, or you're going back to university, who are the people then that you can follow that are going to expose you in a way that's going to positively reinforce that goal? And that while they might be kind of subliminal or non-conscious messages, through repetition, they do help you form opinions and form values and a lot of things. And we don't really give enough credit to how much our non-conscious mind absorbs as well, and so it can be a force for good in that way, that actually can help reinforce our goals. I know certain elements, you can follow certain researchers like nerds like me and you, that love to find out the new papers and everything else, and it can get you exposed to things that maybe you will have missed before, so it can be quite positive. But I love what you say about having the apps on a different page or in a particular folder, or even if you want to take it to the next level, being conscious of your consumption of them and saying, well, this is my time of day that I use this. And actually I've got this 3-hour window where I engage with this, and I can go to town in this time, but the rest of the day is when I focus on other things that are important to me.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I thought it might be fun to do some live workshopping for the app as it is.
Oh,
so we've got we've got a few things that we have created on the basis of where people struggle with healthy eating, because the whole goal of the app is to help people eat well consistently. And so within that, going further upstream, what are the behaviors that we need to try and encourage to allow people to achieve that goal of eating well consistently for the downstream goals of like preventing conditions, maybe even supporting conditions, all the other sort of health goals that we have within that. And so, we've done some categories: the no chop, the low cooking. We're also doing one with leftovers. We are doing one with less than 5 ingredients. We have a cost one as well that we're working on at the moment for less than £1 a portion. So there's definitely certain categories that we can sort of isolate. But I think thinking about the app wider, we're currently just a library of recipes that you can filter according to dietaries, allergens, to make it more accessible for your family members and all the rest of it. And the ultimate aim is to integrate it with supermarkets that we're actively working on. So you can create a quick meal plan in a couple of clicks, and then it integrates with supermarkets. So it's akin to a digital meal kit, but at the convenience and the price of a normal supermarket shop. Removing friction completely. Yeah. And then ultimately, I'd love to get to the point where we partner with vetted cloud kitchens that we know can prepare the food to our standards and using really high quality ingredients that can be delivered to your door when you want it. Because let's face it, everyone experiences times in their week where they can't be bothered to cook, and the default option is to go for a takeaway because that's going to be the quickest and the easiest. We want to make sure that there is also a quick, easy option for healthy food as well. So that's sort of blue sky thinking down the road. But in terms of creating
isn't that
those,
crazy that's blue sky thinking in a way? Because sorry to interrupt, but that it's crazy to even conceive that we could get healthy food quickly. It's why is that crazy? And then that's something that we need to address. And I commend you in that goal. And I don't mean to laugh about it, but it's that should be something that is available to us all.
Totally.
So, it's exciting that we're getting there, but isn't it crazy that that's so inaccessible to us even in this day and age?
100%. And I really feel that at some point in the future, they will be heavily subsidized as well. Because if we can demonstrate the cost effectiveness of providing a cheaper option than the junk food options, and we can demonstrate that people are more likely to opt in because they are price sensitive and they enjoy that food, and it's more and more convenient, then I definitely see it, something that could be rolled out on a grand scale. And I really hope we get to that point, but it's going to take a lot of lobbying, I think, in that respect. But so in terms of we're going to have like a basic section when we teach you the basics of, how to chop onions and how to make your spring greens and how to use leftovers and that kind of stuff. But in terms of like, other elements of behavior change that we can instill in an app, such as ours, as we're thinking about other areas, what are the areas you think that we should be learning perhaps from other apps and maybe instigating in our own?
Yeah, great question. And I think you alluded to it earlier, and you gave some amazing examples of, I would start even from the platform of creating an app around autonomy, competence, and relatedness. And I know you touch on a lot of these things within the app. But as a starting point, I'd almost, potentially in the onboarding process or when people first come in, but I'd really want to understand and you might have this through your user testing, but what are people's motives for engaging in the first place? What does it give them back in their life? What is their why behind using it? Because if people can see how it delivers to them, how it gives them back, more freedom, more time, more energy, more focus, better long-term health, be able to, if I was to be really crude about it, like be able to stick around long enough to see your children get married, whatever it is, if we can kind of look at, what this gives someone back, then I think it's a really, really important place to get started from, that people can then make choices that are meaningful for them so they can really understand. And it can be a question about, it can just be as simple as asking people, why is it important for you to use this app? And even just someone going through that exercise alone can really help evoke, and sometimes it can take 5 whys. If you say to someone like, I want to get fit, for example, well, why do you want to get fitter? I want to get fitter because I'm at this step challenge at work and I want to get 10,000 steps a day. And why do you want to get to join the step challenge? Oh, because I want to get more energy. And why do you want more energy? Well, I find it hard to kind of go through the full day at work and then look after the kids in the evening. I'd like to have more for them in the evening. And why does that matter to you? Okay, well, being a positive role model to my children is important to me. And if you ask yourself why enough times, it is irritating. But, you can get to that true root, and that's the intrinsic motivation. That's the flame. That's the ignition. That's what's going to really keep that fire going, keep that fuel going for you long term. It's not that so and so told you to eat healthily. It's not that it's Mary down the road is doing it, so you feel like you need to do it too. It's actually what it gives you back in your life, and if you can create that from the get-go and understand that, that's a really important place to start from. And then you can start making meaningful choices, and you can see, and I know that you've got all the categories, the brain health and the anti-inflammatory. So you can see that actually these are meaningful foods to engage with. Another key part, and more tapping into the competence piece, is what are the barriers? So what's going to get in the way of you actually using this app? Is it, the position on your home screen? Is it the notifications? Or is it that, you might set and forget it? And so, it's important to actually support users to make it easier to engage with your app. And like I said, one of the primary things that's really important with an app is using the app a habit itself. So it might be asking people, when and where is it best for you to use this app? And can we support you with notifications around that? Is that something that would be helpful for you? Always asking and making it optional for people. Always offering an emergency exit for people, because we never want to force or coerce people into anything, because that's not autonomous in nature. And so asking people, so for example, it might be, I'd love to get a notification at 6 o'clock, what is your newest dinner recipe? Or on a Sunday afternoon, I might want to learn more about like what I can batch cook for this week. Or before I do my shopping on a Thursday, I'd love, the top 5 recipes that people have been using this week. Or whatever it is, it's just bringing it to where people are at and making it easier for them to make the healthier choice. And so understanding, like you've done the work already, understanding what those barriers are and constantly looking at breaking those down. I just did an exercise with people on my newsletter list, which I was asking them to make a friction list and make a fuel list. Think about a behavior that you're wishing to change right now. Say, you want to get more into healthy eating. What are, all the friction points? What are all the barriers that are getting in the way right now? And then from that list, pick the easiest one and execute on that first. And then start to knock off week by week all of those. And at the same time, look at the fuel. What helps you engage more? Is it, getting new recipes, having that variety? And what we know from behavioral science is actually variety and novelty is very engaging for people. Unfortunately, that's why the gambling industry does so well, because they've got that variability. They often use that very well in, like you said, in social media apps. When you open them up, you often open them up on the Explore tab. So you're instantly getting that variety, you're getting that novelty, and users enjoy that. We all don't. We don't want things to be too predictable. We do like a little bit of surprise and delight. And I think that's important. And also, it also challenges competence over time as well, because if once we kind of get competent at creating certain recipes, we're like, okay, Ruby, I'm ready for the next challenge. Hit me with the knife skills, or how to make something a little bit more complex, because I'm ready. And you can even frame that in a way in your app as well. So you can frame those kind of MasterChef style recipes maybe that require a little bit more time, might require a little bit more skills, but it's a way to learn a new skill. That's certainly from a competence point of view. I think it's very important to, like you've done already, like look at those key barriers and keep looking at those, but also asking people, well, what's going to get in the way the most for you, and how do we overcome that? Rather than it being kind of all or nothing. So, oh, well, I didn't remember to use the app this week, so now, a common example is, we're trying to create a running habit, and we go outside and it's raining, and we're like, oh, well, I can't run today. But like, live in the UK, it's going to rain, so what's the alternative? Do you have a strength and conditioning for runners workout that you do on your phone on an app at that time? Or do you always, is your default to rearrange it for the next morning with a friend? But we need to have, and they call them in the science, implementation intentions. So we need to have plans in place, because we are going to fail. We're not going to follow through, because we're human beings. We're free range human beings. We're not rational beings at all. And so we need to have plans for failure. And so if we can use an app and use a digital device to support that, we're going to fail, but to support bringing things to us when and where matters most to us, when and where is going to be most effective for us, it means that it'll be much more likely that your app will actually support us in engaging with our goals more frequently, and therefore more likely to create habits around it.
Yeah, that's such good advice about, advice for or methods of how to get back on track, because failure is inevitable, and failure is something that we need to sort of embrace as well. I think you can really employ a growth mindset when it comes to failure, whatever you describe as failure. I wonder if there are apps that you've come across, not necessarily in the healthy eating space, and maybe not even in the sort of lifestyle space, that you look at and you're like, that is genius. That is really like everything that I think my research and my experience as sort of dictated would work very well. And it, clearly it does something, whether it's a feature or a suite of features. What things do you think that you've come across that you really like?
Great question. There's an app. No, I would say I haven't found the perfect app as of yet, but that's good, because we're all work in progress. So there's always work to do, and we're still learning from a behavioral design point of view. It's not like more behavior change suddenly will make everyone stick to their habits as well. You've got to test and iterate within your own app to see what your audience, what works best for them. I would say I really like the Fabulous app. I don't know if you've seen that one. It comes out
I've seen it. Yeah,
I think it's Duke University that are behind it. It's not flawless, but there's definitely a lot to love about it. And what I love about it is that it takes people on a journey. And it shows them that, you know, behavioral change, whatever habit that you wish to change, it isn't just about the particular outcomes. It's about going on a journey, learning more about yourself, you know, learning what your likes and dislikes are. We're learning, you know, how you operate in the context of your life. They also use really affirming language, which I think is really important. I know a lot of apps use praise often. So they're saying like, well done or good job. And we have all had that teacher or that coach that's been constantly like, well done, good job. But it doesn't feel as meaningful as maybe when someone stops and says, you know, you've really persisted with this, or, you know, you've shown your commitment here, or you're a very dedicated person. You know, someone who sees your strengths can really then evoke that intrinsic motivation in you rather than this kind of surface level praise. And I know that they certainly do that with the Fabulous app. You know, they're all about actually affirming you as an individual, and showing you that, you know, behavior change is not something that happens overnight. It's a lifelong process, and it is a journey, and it has ups and downs, and you know, highs and lows. And I think that's very, very important that people come into any habit change with that mindset of, you know, this is a lifelong practice, so let's make it a enjoyable one. And they certainly make it fun and enjoyable, and even to the point where you know, I looked at what their process was for quitting the app, and you know, what language they used around that, and they say that it was a really quite interesting. And they said, like, you know, we're sorry to see you go. I hope it wasn't any mistake. I'm paraphrasing now, I probably got this all wrong, but this is the kind of this is the feeling that it gave me. They were like, we're sorry to see you go. We hope it wasn't any mistake on our side, but if we did, you know, we'd be happy to open up a conversation with a behavioral scientist around, you know, what were the reasons that you wish to leave. And then they present some research on you know, leaving and quitting, and you know, and then re-engaging, and how helpful that is. And I just thought it was really interesting way of actually being really, like, you know, candid about the fact that, you know, it's completely your option to leave, but we'd love to understand more about why. And it shows that they're interested in the long-term effectiveness of the program as well. And interesting as well, they didn't just focus on, I think a lot of apps overly focus on rewards and badges and other bits and pieces. And whilst they can be useful, they can also be slightly extrinsic motivators. You know, and if you start doing something for a reward or a badge alone, then, you know, you're not really doing it for the process or the joy of engaging. And while they can be useful at the start, and they can be useful if we can link them with something meaningful. So I work with an incredible company called Thrive Tribe, and we were just talking about one of their apps recently. It's called a Gloji app, and we were talking about actually how we could use rewards and make them actually symbols. So for their Stop Smoking campaign, can we use, like, you know, a nose symbol for, you know, your smell and your taste comes back over time, so that actually it's just more meaningful than just having a little badge on your notice board, that you can even just make that association and see what it gives you back. So I would say, you know, don't overly rely on rewards and gamification to do the work for you. You need to do the work in terms of actually making the content itself exciting, being able to equip people with the skills, you know, surprising and delighting people whilst building their competence and making them feel like they're part of a community, and that they're related to one another. And actually, I'd be really interested in your thoughts about what kind of community elements you're thinking about bringing into your work.
Yeah, absolutely. Just on that note about affirming language, I find that absolutely fascinating. I remember reading in Caroline Dweck's book about the language that parents use and why we need to be quite mindful of that. So instead of praising in a way that highlights their specific skills, like, you know, oh, you're really good at math, or you're really good at football, or, you know, it's, you tried really hard, and oh, you persisted with that and you got the answer. And, you know, so you're highlighting certain elements of their skill set and their behaviors that can be applied and transferred to a variety of endeavors, rather than creating an identity that's fixed to a certain activity that then sticks with them throughout their whole life. Like, I identify as a doctor, and I've actually had to sort of rip myself out of it, not completely, but move myself into, like, I'm also a podcaster, I'm also like a cook and a recipe creator, I'm also a writer, all these different elements that I've had to adopt and really highlight on my the skill set that allows me to do those.
And I think actually that's such an important point from habit change, because even in our study of those that managed to create long-term change, identity was such a huge piece. Those that actually saw themselves as someone who was, lived a healthy lifestyle, that was often the switch for people into long-term change, was that they started to actually identify as someone who enjoyed eating well, enjoyed learning what was seasonal in terms of eating and vegetables, or even grow. We had one person who's growing their own veg then for the first time, and it was when they started to create a new identity around it. They no longer saw themselves as someone who was a dieter and constantly failing. They saw themselves as someone who liked to try out new things. They saw themselves as someone who liked the adventure of being healthy. They saw themselves, it was when they created this new identity that they really kind of stepped into themselves fully, and really started to stick with those habits then long term.
Yeah. I totally dig that. And the community element that we're trying to instill within the app and also within the newsletter as well is something that we've been toying around with. So for the last book, the one that's coming out in January 23, we reached out to our community members, and we had like a crazy response. So it's something like 1,500 people, and we asked everyone, like, do you want to help out with the next book and try out some of the recipes before we go to refine them, shoot them, and put them in the book? And we had this crazy response, like, yeah, definitely. And so we had to collect all their dietaries, send them each individually a recipe. It was almost like a technical challenge, but with the methodology. So no images, no sort of like direct tips or anything, just like, these are the ingredients, this is the methodology, and fill out this questionnaire afterwards. And it goes through accuracy of the ingredients, the timing, the prep, any other thoughts, all this stuff. And we had honestly like over 1,000 responses that I personally went through every single one to review. And a lot of people loved that process. They loved being part of it, and they want to do it again. And so this is sort of one of the things that we're trying to instill within the Doctor's Kitchen newsletter community. It's more than just you get an email passively into your email box. That's quite interesting. Oh yes, I've got a recipe. I'll make that this weekend or this week, and I can't wait for next week's. It's like, no, I want you to sort of join the community of like this incredible group of foodies who love food and they love healthy lifestyle and they love all the other elements that we like talking about within the newsletter. And I want you guys to meet. And so we're figuring out how to do this, whether it's a Facebook private group, whether it's a Discord, whether it's a Slack group. Like, I mean, I have thoughts about groups in general, and I just want to make it as frictionless as possible for people to join. But we want to add that kind of element for the app as well, so we can release like recipes that we're testing or categories that we want to introduce. Can we get live feedback from people like, oh, you know what, I'd really like to have a whole category on cauliflower, and like, actually hundreds of other people or thousands of other people also struggle with the same ingredient or the same issues with cooking for families at home, that kind of stuff. So really being part of that live conversation that we can react to, rather than this didactic, okay, we've got another category now, try it out, let us know what you think individually. Like, I think there's a way to make it a lot more collective and enriching the whole sort of app experience in that way.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. I think every good app I've seen is embedded with co-creation, like yours. And it's not just about you, Rupi, creating everything. It's actually about your community contributing. People like you say, like telling you the barriers. So then you're like, right, let's work together. Who's found a way to kind of overcome, who's found a way to make a lasagna healthier, but also, create it in less than 20 minutes. What other vegetables have other people? Actually, one thing I really like about the app is, if you don't have a cucumber, you offer me other vegetables that I could, use instead of it. And like you say, things that people are struggling with, you actually like crowdsource that from the community, is so important. So actually using them to drive the content and to actually help them support others is the best way really to create that feeling of you're part of something bigger than yourself, and create a sense of purpose and identity around it. I'm someone who I don't know if you've got like a kitchenites, I don't know, doctor's kitchenites, or what
I don't have a word for them, no.
you're a tribe, that there are people that really relate with you and to you and all the work that you've done, and they want to learn from you, but they also want to share themselves as well as they grow. And it's a huge part of the learning process, is that being able to share back and get feedback like that, and like you say, try new things. So that's such an important part. It's like, and I think you touched on it a little bit there as well, relatedness has to be done very subtly and in a way that actually is related to what the community wants, rather than just creating forums that are people aren't subscribing to, or there might be one or two people that are really engaged with it, but it's not actually supporting the rest of the community. Relatedness has to be done in a way that's actually going to be just not a box ticking exercise, that it actually is beneficial. And I love that you actually haven't got a structured plan, because you're like, right, well, let's put it out to the community and see what people respond to and what they want to engage with and what they're going to derive value from, because otherwise what's the point in having it if they're not going to derive value? And another point on that in terms of apps is relatedness isn't just your community, but it's also how you communicate through your app as well. Your tone of voice, how accessible your pictures are, how accessible your language is, how you talk about it as well, for people, how you tell them about the value and the benefits that it has, all of that, as well as helping people feel seen and heard, like you have through the research, and continually collecting that data as well, is a really important part of creating relatedness in a digital world.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so many. It's funny because everything is bootstrapped for the app at the moment. So there's obviously cost prohibitions for what I really want to do. Like I've got all these great ideas and ways in which to engage people more and have training recipes, and there's so many elements of features that we've collected from the community, because at the end of I'm so glad you noticed that alternatives, that's actually been a really positive feature for a lot of people as well. Again, that came out of the research, because one of the health barriers were I like using recipes, but then I come across a recipe and then I don't have these certain ingredients, or I haven't heard certain ingredients, and I don't really know what the alternatives are, and I can't be bothered to Google what can I use instead of, because I don't know whether I can actually substitute a courgette with an aubergine in this particular recipe. And sometimes you can't. Sometimes it does require the original ingredient. And so one of the things that we did in our recipe creation process is always think about, okay, can you change the beans here to something completely different? Can you change the carrots to another starchy vegetable? Would it work given the cooking times and everything that we have for this particular recipe? So the alternatives there, and also the send recipe feedback at the bottom that I personally respond to, all of them. It can be positive feedback, which, it is 90% of the time. Other times they might have picked up issues, which we fix straight away. But also we're also gleaming whether people love this recipe. Okay, it's okay, that's the fuel for us to go and create some more of these, in the similar sort of vein. Obviously with a pinch of salt, and making sure that we're being reflective of the entire community of app users. But yeah, no, it's been a really good, enjoyable process thus far, and I've got lots of plans for it as we go forward, and I just want to make it the most user friendly, accessible, and behavior changing app there is out there, given the constraints of the costs and everything. As you know, it's a very expensive endeavor to get into.
Although in a way, it's good to start with, and I often talk about this in terms of habits. Like, you have your MVP, your minimum viable product, but I call it an MVH, your minimum viable habit. When we're creating any change in our life, we want to start in the smallest, tiniest way to see what works and what sticks and what doesn't. And I think in a way those constraints are going to lead to ultimately creating a better product, and one that's way more tailored toward and supportive of your community. And so in a way, it's frustrating, but it's a useful way of actually really tailoring and personalizing things to make sure that they're super targeted and focusing on adding value back.
Yeah, absolutely. I have to think about it through that lens actually, because if we did have
Small
this,
steps.
if we had the Silicon Valley style startup where you raise a buttload of money, then we probably would have introduced all these features right at the same time and made it super complicated, rather than doing it in the lean sort of way in which we're doing, which is like very targeted to the most important needs of most of the users, rather than just the needs of a few that we feel like would be a fun thing to have or a nice thing to have, rather than something that's actually useful. We've talked,
and simple apps are the best. Like, like I think about like another example of one that is great is Headspace. It's very simple to use, very easy to engage with, and it gives you options for, you can do the meditation of the day. You can do it for 3 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and it's variable. And like you say, actually being forced to be quite lean in your approach can be really useful, because the bells and whistles can be distracting, they can be confusing, they can be overwhelming, because we're not only trying to build people's competence and confidence to cook, we're trying to build their confidence and competence to actually use the app as well. And if people can instantly feel unsuccessful or overwhelmed, they're not going to engage. And so we want people to feel like they can actually operate and navigate the app well from the get-go. It's like almost like going into the supermarket, and for the first time, and not knowing where anything is and what the aisles are or anything else. We want to be, that trusted friend that actually can help guide someone through that process and really help support them in getting to where they need to be.
Yeah, that's exactly the intentions of the app as well. We're creating sort of like a tiers as well. So right now it's a premium app with a free trial, but there is definitely a use case for a freemium version, which we're actively working on. In fact, it might come out by the time this goes out, where you can check into the app and you can dip in and see some recipes that will change every now and then. So you get a feel for like the recipes, and if you feel like you get value from the premium versions, then we'll do that as well. So there's all these little like steps that we're taking to sort of welcome people into like this ecosystem in a friendly way, that I'm really positive about, and I can't wait to release. There are so many things I've picked up today. If you like, this is, if anyone's watching on YouTube, these are like my scribbly notes that I've got here. But I wanted to end up, because you talked a lot about basically skill power. I love this. Like, instead of willpower, it's about skill power, and the skills that we need to develop to enhance our desired changes, whatever the context might be, whether it's spending more time with our family, whether it's eating healthier, whether it's exercising, whether it's meditating, whether it's being more rigid with work hours, whatever that might be. I wonder if you could give us some like key tips, and it doesn't have to be anything new. You've said a lot already today about different skills today, but what skills would you say that people should really lean into? Maybe a few things just to round off our conversation that users can take away today.
Amazing. Yeah. Where to start? Yeah, there's so many. And again, it's about finding the flavor that works for you. But I would say even, and maybe I'm going to bend the rules in terms of what is a skill and what isn't. But I would say start with joy, and find things that bring you joy, because I think that's a really important life skill to develop, regardless of what the habit is that you're wishing to develop. And alongside that, I would say find meaning. And even you can, if you even kind of lean into meaning in the most arduous of tasks. So, for me, like, doing my tax return maybe, isn't the funnest thing in the world. But if I tell myself, well, actually, if I tap into the intrinsic motivation behind it, well, actually, this helps me feel competent and capable as a business owner, then I feel more, motivated to engage with it, and I can see what actually gives me back. So always ask yourself, what contribution does this make to my life? What positive contribution does this give me? I think that's really important. So find joy, find your why, which is what I mean by meaningful. Finding the meaning behind it for you. I would say start as small as possible. I always talk about bite-sized habits. Don't bite off more than you can chew. And the reason being, because small is mighty and small is repeatable, but also it's much more flexible as well. So often when it comes to creating long-term change, we think we have to drastically change everything overnight. But what we know from the research, and a lot of us know from real life, unfortunately, is that is definitely unsustainable. Whereas those smaller habits make them much more likely to repeat, and repetition ultimately is what forms a habit over time. And so if they're small and easy enough to repeat, then we're much more likely to engage with them. So rather than starting, with a recipe that's going to take an hour and a half to cook and involves knife skills and all sorts of different sauteing and, caramelization or, crazy tactics, start with, that 5-minute recipe, or start with, like Rupi says, the no chop recipes or whatever it is, start in the smallest way possible. Even I say, I often say, if it doesn't pass the giggle test, it might not be small enough. It's almost laughably small, and that way you start to feel confident and competent, and you're more likely to gain momentum, and it's much better to kind of look back down the mountain and be proud of the steps you've taken, rather than be constantly looking at what's ahead and all of those hills you have to climb. And I think it's really important that we have the compassion for ourselves to start small and iterate. Even say you want to create a meditation habit, rather than starting with 10 minutes, why not 1 minute while the kettle boils, just 1 minute breathing, or while your computer loads its updates each day. So find joy, find meaning, and start small. I think that would be a great way to kick it off.
I love that. I really do enjoy the notion of the giggle test, and I'll share something with you actually. So I have a bunch of things on my to-do list, as you can imagine. One of them is to write a vision for the company. In the next 3 to 5 years, what I imagine, what I'd like to aspire to, and within that, we're creating a vision document, images, an org chart, ideal full-time employees that we'd love to have as part of the Doctor's Kitchen. And one of the tasks within there is to write an imagined press release of the company. So a journalist who comes in to our head office, our HQ, wherever that might be, and the article that they actually write about the Doctor's Kitchen. So it's written through the perspective of a reporter who's writing for, I don't know, it could be BBC, it could be Men's Health, could be GQ, could be whatever it might be. Grazia, who knows? And so I tasked myself with literally writing the article. But obviously it's a big task, and I'm a busy guy, whatever. So my giggle test was to literally write one sentence of this article every morning when I do my affirmations. Like, fine, I can do that. It's so laughable that I can definitely do that. And I looked today, I've only been doing it for a week. I've done about 3/4 of the article. So I'm a firm believer, when you break it down to small things, the likelihood is you're not going to do that like laughably small thing. You're just inevitably going to like write a few more sentences, because it's once you get into it, you get into it.
Yeah.
So there's
absolutely. Getting started is
There's a
Getting started is
fire
the
thing that
hardest
just
part,
went
like you
straight
say.
past.
But yeah, no, getting started is the hardest part. And like you say, once you kind of gain that momentum, then you almost feel, you know, your strengths are reaffirmed and you're like, oh, actually, I can do this. And now you've got, you know, 3/4 of it done. And it always just started with one small step.
Yeah, totally. This has been brilliant. Thank you so much for sharing your time again with us, Heather. We'll definitely do a call out to all your socials and where corporates can reach out to you, because I think you would be a wonderful addition to employee well-being and everything else that we talked about today. So thank you so much. It's been brilliant.
Thank you so much. I've learned so much as well myself. So, yeah, thanks for your time.
If you enjoyed that video, you'll love the library of content that we have on thedoctorskitchen.com. Make sure you hit subscribe, and we have podcasts in our library on brain health, well-being, supplements, and lots more. Have a wonderful day.